Although many types of cultures exist in the world, and everyone has their own history and everyone is very proud of their culture and history. But something happens in history that makes someone an opponent of someone else. Today we are going to talk about which are those countries, which do not want to see Europeans in their country. Now there could be many reasons behind this, like geopolitics, international trade or colonialism in history. Well, you all must be aware about the history of Europe that, Europe has been surrounded by many wars in its history, and if you ask me, where in this world the most blood has been shed, then I believe that it is Europe. And still there are some countries in Europe where there is a war going on, and that is why there are some countries which have imposed sanctions on Europe, and there are some countries which do not want the culture of Europe to spread in their country. So let us now know which are those countries which do not want to see Europeans in their country. So our first country is Algeria. Algeria's history with France is one of the most complex in the post-colonial world. After more than 130 years of French colonial rule, Algeria fought a brutal war of independence from 1954 to 1962, during which tens of thousands of Algerians and French settlers, known as pieds noirs, died. The war left deep scars on the collective memory of both nations, and the legacy of colonialism continues to shape the relationship between Algeria and France today. Even decades after independence, relations between France and Algeria remain tense, with many Algerians still harboring resentment over the colonial past. One of the most sensitive issues is the treatment of Algerian migrants in France, as well as the unresolved question of the return of colonial-era artifacts. This tension often manifests in political discourse, with some in Algeria perceiving France's actions as disrespectful or patronizing. While many Algerians continue to appreciate the cultural and historical ties with France, tensions rise when European countries, particularly France, are perceived as meddling in Algeria's internal affairs. This complex legacy means that Europeans, particularly those from France, may not always be fully embraced in Algeria. It is important to note that not all Algerians harbor hatred towards Europeans, and many understand the historical context and complexity of these relations. But due to this colonialism in history, Algeria has suffered a lot and all Algerians are still afraid of Europe. So let's move on to our next country, which is Turkey. Turkey's relationship with Europe is deeply influenced by the history of the Ottoman Empire, which for centuries had a significant presence in southeastern Europe. The collapse of the empire in the early 20th century and the founding of the modern Turkish Republic in 1923 marked the beginning of a new era. However, tensions between Turkey and European nations, especially Greece, France, and Germany, have remained. Turkey has long sought to join the European Union, but its accession talks have faced several hurdles due to concerns over human rights, democratic reforms, and its complicated relationship with Cyprus. The 1974 Turkish invasion of Cyprus, which led to the island's division, is a particularly contentious issue. In recent years, Turkey's leadership under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has led to increasing tensions with European countries, especially over human rights issues, freedom of the press, and the rule of law. The migrant crisis in 2015, in which Turkey hosted millions of refugees, also complicated relations with European nations, particularly Germany, grappling with how to manage the flow of migrants. There is also a growing sense of nationalism in Turkey, which sometimes manifests in anti-European sentiment. This can be seen in the portrayal of European nations in Turkish media and public discourse, where certain European countries are often criticized for perceived interference in Turkey's internal politics. So let's move on to our third country, which is Russia. Russia's relationship with Europe has been marked by centuries of war, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. From the time of the Russian Empire through the Soviet era and into modern-day Russia, European powers have often been seen as both rivals and partners. The rivalry between Russia and European countries, particularly the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, reached its height during the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was a dominant global superpower. Since the end of the Cold War, relations between Russia and Europe have been fraught with tension, particularly in light of the 2014 annexation of Crimea, Russia's involvement in the conflict in Ukraine, and its increasingly assertive foreign policy. The European Union and the United States have imposed sanctions on Russia in response to these actions, which has led to a growing sense of anti-Western sentiment within the country. In Russia, the perception of European interference in Russian domestic affairs is often met with hostility. Europeans are sometimes viewed as representing liberalism and democracy, ideals that clash with Russia's more conservative, autocratic tendencies. This divide has led to strained relations, especially during periods of military conflict or political crises. Although Russians love European culture, but Europeans are not very welcome in Russia due to politics. So our next country is Iran. Iran's relationship with Europe is shaped by a long history of cultural and diplomatic exchange, but also by conflict, especially during the 20th century. In the early 20th century, Iran was influenced by both British and Russian imperial interests. In 1953, a CIA-backed coup overthrew Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, which created long-lasting resentment toward the West. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which led to the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran, relations with European countries became increasingly strained. The United States and many European nations, particularly the UK and France, cut ties with Iran as the new regime was seen as hostile to Western ideals. Despite attempts to thaw relations, particularly after the 2015 nuclear deal (JCPOA), tensions have escalated once again due to concerns over Iran's nuclear ambitions, its involvement in regional conflicts, and its human rights record. The European Union has been caught in a delicate balancing act, attempting to maintain diplomatic relations with Iran while adhering to US sanctions and dealing with Iran's more authoritarian policies. For Europeans, especially those with political ties to the West, travel to Iran can be fraught with challenges. Iranians, particularly under the leadership of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, have at times portrayed Europeans as either enemies of Iran or as pawns of the United States. This perception can lead to a sense of suspicion or even hostility toward European diplomats and travelers. So let's move on to our last country, which is North Korea. Well, you all must be knowing about North Korea. This country does not want to have any relations with any other country, and especially this country has a lot of problems with the Western countries. North Korea's relationship with the West, and specifically with European countries, is largely shaped by its isolationist policies and the ongoing tensions with South Korea and its allies, including the United States. After the Korean War 1950 to 1953, North Korea became a Soviet-aligned communist state, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it continued to isolate itself from much of the international community. Under the leadership of Kim Jong-un, North Korea has maintained a hardline stance against foreign influence, especially from the West. The regime views European countries, along with the United States and South Korea, as hostile powers due to their involvement in economic sanctions, and their criticism of the country's human rights record and nuclear weapons program. European diplomats and citizens, especially those involved in politics or human rights advocacy, can find themselves at odds with North Korea's authoritarian regime. The country's policies of self-reliance, or juche, are often presented as a counterpoint to Western political ideals, which makes Europeans, particularly those involved in Western governments, potentially unwelcome in the eyes of the regime. So these were those 5 countries which have a lot of problems with the Europeans, and this problem may increase even more in the future, because everyone will be seeing how much tension is going on in the world these days. At present there is a war going on between Ukraine and Russia and between Israel and Palestine. Looking at the kind of tension going on, it seems that going from one country to another is going to be very difficult in the coming times. Well, this was today's video. If you want to tell me something, please let me know in the comment section, and also tell me what topic the next video should be on. So friends, if you liked this video, then please subscribe to the channel. I will keep bringing such videos in future also. See you in the next video.